Did the Revolutionary Guards in Iran record their first dramatic victory overnight? The Iranian regime is testing Washington's limits and trying to improve its position in the negotiations through threats. And we will bring you the image that is shaking the world. United States Vice President J.D. Vance humiliated by the Iranians, while the Revolutionary Guards threatened to blow up the talks. The United States agreed to approve oil sales for Iran and even unfrozen Iranian frozen assets. All the while, the Revolutionary Guards declared the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. And then came the insane demand from the Iranians to Trump as a condition for continuing the negotiations. Following this demand, Trump began threatening Iran again. If you close the Strait of Hormuz, we will take control of it. And at the same time, the Revolutionary Guards flexed their muscles. They got up, they left the negotiating table, and then returned to it. It seems that Trump is playing a double game. So what's really hiding behind the reconciliation with Iran? And inside Iran, the regime in Tehran is inventing espionage in order to murder opponents. We will bring you all the details that we have in this report. And did the Israeli Mossad eliminated the Iranian AI pioneer? In Iran, they accuse Israel, and we will bring you all the details very soon. I'm Yair Pinto. With me is Mati Shoshani. We are here on Boots on the Ground. We bring you the whole truth about what is happening in Israel and also the whole truth about what is happening in our neighborhood, the Middle East. Today is June 22nd, so let's begin. The round of talks between the American and the Iranian delegations ended tonight, between Sunday and Monday, after 18 hours of discussions. According to a joint statement by the mediators, Qatar and Pakistan, the sides agreed on a roadmap for resolving disputes and establishing regional stability. According to the mediators, the contacts took place in a positive and constructive atmosphere, but encountered significant difficulties because of militant rhetoric from the United States President Donald Trump. In an interview with Fox News, Trump threatened that the United States may take control of the Strait of Hormuz and called the Iranians harsh names. Close it, and you will not have a country. You will not even be able to return to your country. Despite the historic humiliation that was experienced yesterday by the American delegation in Switzerland, headed by Vice President J.D. Vance, Iran recorded tonight, according to its version, its first dramatic victory in Lucerne. According to the statement by the Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, Iran already achieved in the first session a partial removal of the sanctions that have been choking its economy for years. Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesman Ismail Bagahi claimed that the Iranian delegation initially announced the intention to stop the talks if the format will not change because of Trump's threats. And in the end, the mediators, which are Qatar and Pakistan, they managed to preserve the continuity of the discussions in the technical formats. So what did Trump say that angered the Revolutionary Guards so much? He said that the United States may take control of the Strait of Hormuz if Iran closes it, and warned the president of Iran that he had better watch his mouth. And according to reports in Iran, at the same time, Trump threatened in the Post that if Iran does not stop the activity of its proxies in Lebanon, the United States will strike it again, only harder. The agreement establishes the creation of a direct communication line for managing incidents in the Strait of Hormuz for 60 days, as defined in the Memorandum of Understanding. Iran committed to act with all its strength to ensure safe and free passage for commercial ships between the Persian Gulf and the Sea of Oman. In addition, it was decided to establish a high-level committee that will oversee the diplomatic process and lead focused working groups on the issues of nuclear sanctions removal, monitoring, and dispute resolution in order to ensure effective implementation of the understandings. On the economic level, Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi declared that the American administration approved a sanctions waiver in the field of oil and pave the way for the release of Iranian assets that are frozen abroad. Another central development is the establishment of the de-escalation cell, which is mediated by Qatar and Pakistan, whose purpose is to ensure the end of military activity in Lebanon. This is an especially complex mission, given the repeated violations of the ceasefire by the Hezbollah terrorist organization, when only this past week 5 soldiers of the IDF were killed. At this stage, Israel agreed to hold fire outside the yellow line in order to allow the continuation of the discussions. The technical terms remain in Switzerland for the current week in order to continue discussing all the issues on the agenda. The contacts were conducted under the shadow of the Iranian military command, which announced on Saturday its intention to close the Strait of Hormuz in response to Israeli strikes in Lebanon and to Iran's claims regarding the non-fulfillment of the American commitments. Look, it's absurd that the Revolutionary Guards insists on putting the focus on Israel. The demand for an Israeli withdrawal from southern Lebanon has become one of the central issues around these contacts. In the evening hours, it was reported that an Iranian source familiar with the details told the Iranian news agency Tasnim, if Israel does not withdraw from Lebanon, the negotiations will stop. Let us remember that about an hour ago, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu spoke at the memorial for his brother, Yoni Netanyahu, and said that we will remain in the security zone as long as necessary. Imagine for a moment that the United States, on the side of the border, they threaten you with rocket fire, with kidnapping, and with murder every day. What would the United States do if they were in our shoes? So let's stop and wait. It would kill the terrorists and remove the threat. That's what the US will do. They will attack. That is what it will do. And that is what we are implementing, said the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu. He also said that together with the American demands for ceasefire in Lebanon and the discussion about withdrawal from southern Lebanon taking place in the background, that no country will do this better because the terrorists are not only harming civilians, they are hiding behind their own civilians, the population of Lebanon. The working assumption in Jerusalem is that there is no feasibility for a real arrangement. No feasibility of an arrangement between Iran and the United States because the gaps are too large. But here in Israel, we do not intend to interfere. Israel was not surprised by the exchanges of threats between the President of the United States and the Iranians. But in Jerusalem, they do not think that this will lead to the talks blowing up because Tehran has too much to lose. Regarding Lebanon in Israel, there is no willingness for withdrawals because of the American pressure. However, there is preparation for possible changes and movements in the presence of the IDF in southern Lebanon, not to surrender to the pressure, but in order not to endanger the forces. Prime Minister Netanyahu said in the closed discussions that Israel will preserve operational freedom of action in southern Lebanon in order to protect the residents of the north and in order not to put the soldiers in danger. A security official referred last night to the presence of on the yellow line in southern Lebanon and said the IDF will remain there as long as there is no peace agreement for the security of the communities. There is no withdrawal. And while the Revolutionary Guards in Iran are conducting negotiations, the lives of Iranian citizens have turned into hell. The regime in Tehran is conducting a violent internal repression campaign, including a wave of executions of young people, political activists, and ethnic minorities. Despite the diplomatic and the economic contacts with the West, Iranian authorities are using charges such as espionage and enmity against God as tools to break the spirit of the resistance of the population, while grossly violating legal procedures and using torture meant to extract false confessions. And is the hand of the Mossad, the Israeli spy agency behind the mysterious death of a senior Iranian official in France. In Iran, they accused the Mossad for eliminating the Iranian AI pioneer, Dr. Ali Ishnaiya, an Iranian researcher who previously cooperated with the defensive ministry in Tehran, and he died under mysterious circumstances in the city of Nice in France. So there's a lot ahead of us. So let's dive into the details. I'm Yair Pinto. With me is Mati Shoshani, and we are here on Boots on the Ground. We bring you the whole truth about what's happening here in Israel and about this war against the Revolutionary Guards in Iran, against the Hezbollah terrorist organization in Lebanon, against the Houthis in Yemen, and against the Hamas terrorist organization in the Gaza Strip. All of them are part of the axis of evil in the Middle East. And a second before we begin, I want to call on you to continue spreading the truth. Share our content with as many people as possible. Click on the subscribe button, and most importantly, do not forget to look for me, Yair Pinto, and for Mati Shoshani on our social media accounts to get our view through our eyes of what it's like to live in Israel under this war. Because as missiles once again fall across the land of Israel from Iran, Hezbollah, and other enemies, many people are asking how they can stand with Israel in a meaningful way. The answer is simple. Help us rebuild. To the people of Israel, you are not alone. When you donate, you're not just giving, you're rebuilding. Your support puts trees in the ground. It restores livelihoods and transforms land that is carved by war into a land that grows again. This is how renewal takes root. This is how Israel rebuilds after war. So stand with Israel today. Plant hope, restore the North, and strengthen the future. Go now to tbn.org/rebuildisrael. tbn.org/rebuildisrael or call 800-804-7895. Again, that's 800-804-7895. Rebuild the land, restore hope, and bless the future. And now, we will move to our senior Middle East correspondent, Mati Shoshani, who's with us. Mati, how are you doing?
I'm now unmuted and I can talk. Hey, I can hear you. How's it going, Yair? I'm doing well. I woke up, I think, as everyone, deeply confused about what's happening between Iran and the U.S., and honestly deeply concerned about what's happening in this negotiation. It was a circus, a freak show of a negotiation yesterday, and I can only hope it gets better today.
Quite alarming. What do you think about what happened? I think it was very, very, shameful for the U.S. administration, and I think that the Iranians kind of took J.D. Vance on a spin in terms of the public image that they created in this conference that we're seeing right next to us. What we're seeing basically is that J.D. Vance wanted to shake the hands of the Iranian delegation, and they basically just ignored him completely. So what message does this send to the next level of this negotiation?
Yeah, let's say that since most of our viewers are in North America, I want to tell you in North America and Americans what the Iranians are doing to your government. They intentionally humiliated your vice president. These things are not a mistake. These ceremonies of respect and of body language and physical positioning in rooms, hugely important in Muslim and Arab culture. And this was a intentional, not the first one, by the way, an intentional disregard and prevention of the U.S. as appearing powerful in the room in these conversations. Not an accident, an intentional humiliation of your current vice president. Not a mistake, but an intention and a showing of their intentions towards you. That's one. By the way, it's both the negotiators, the mediators, and the Iranians behind them. Two, here's what happens. President Trump starts, it's not tweeting, he's on Truth Social, but let's call it tweets. He starts tweeting yesterday, and the Iranians pretend to be offended. Oh no, Trump has sabotaged the negotiation. We must go home. We were so deeply offended. Oh, Yair, I'm heartbroken by this level of offense. What's really happening behind the scenes? Trump says two things in his communication to the world, which thankfully is usually very, very direct and almost immediate. He says two things. He says, one, if the Iranians continue to refuse negotiating with the U.S., maybe we should go back to attacking, and maybe we collect the tax from everyone who goes to the Strait of Hormuz. He says a second thing. He says, you know what? Maybe the IDF has not been strong enough against Hezbollah, the Iranian proxy in Lebanon. Maybe the U.S. should have been attacking Hezbollah. This was yesterday. Why is he doing this? Because at the very same time that he's writing this, he's getting repeated phone calls from the U.S. negotiation team that is telling him the following. Iran refuses to deal with anything relevant in this conversation. They're not talking about nuclear. They're not talking about the Strait of Hormuz. they keep saying release cash and stop fighting against Hezbollah. Now, it's a bizarre conversation. Who is Hezbollah? Let me remind you. Hezbollah is a terrorist organization that the Iranians funded, created, and trained to fight against Israel and Lebanon. And they're demanding, this is sort of the outcome of this negotiation, 18 hours of marathon negotiations that result in the most absurd news release that I've heard in a long time that says, you know what? The solution for the problem in the Middle East right now is that we have a supervision committee that's created by Iran, who funds a terrorist organization in Lebanon, the US, who's not active in Lebanon, and the Lebanese government, who's unable and unwilling to fight against Hezbollah, to create a long-term solution. Who's missing from this conversation and this agreement? Hezbollah, the terrorist organization, who is the one instigating against Israel, and Israel, who's fighting to protect itself against Hezbollah. This is the great achievement of this conversation. And I don't say this to sound dramatic. This is a terrible, terrible negotiation so far. Horrific would be a good word to describe it. The US is being publicly humiliated intentionally by Iran and Qatar in this case. The US is intentionally being prevented from talking about the main issues that are required for dealing with the ongoing problem, which is the war in Iran. And the whole conversation is diverted into a niche issue, which is Hezbollah in Lebanon. And let's be honest, something that's not going to be resolved in this negotiation. So all in all, bad day, bad negotiation, very, very problematic chain of events. And my hope, my expectation would be that the US repeats what they did the last time this was happening. They get up, they get on the plane, and they leave the negotiations. And then they fire up the aircraft carriers, the aircraft, they start fueling them and loading bombs on the planes to show the Iranians that they mean business. And if Iran doesn't respond, the US has the military power in the Middle East right now to show the Iranians what's what and who's the boss in this situation, because this absurdity needs to stop. It's deeply upsetting. It's deeply concerning for the future of this agreement. I mean, think about this. Iran, the entity that lost the war from a military perspective, is dictating to the Americans what happens first in this negotiation. And they're saying, you know what? Maybe we don't open the Strait of Hormuz. Maybe you give us all our money first. We tell you that we want you to stop your ally, Israel, from fighting against our terrorist organization, Hezbollah in Lebanon. Then we'll see. And in the meantime, if it wasn't clear, let's publicly humiliate you. We'll refuse to shake your hand. We won't acknowledge you when you walk into the room. We'll make sure to do that in front of the global press so everyone knows what's actually happening here. That's really the conversation. The right thing for the US team would have been to say, we heard you, we're out. Get back to us when you're willing to behave seriously. And in the meantime, we're going back to full military pressure and to full financial pressure on Iran. But this time, we're going more extreme than we did the last time. That should have been the response, because the goal here in this conversation was to show the world that Iran has the upper hand and the US is on the weaker side of this negotiation. That is the goal of what happened yesterday in Switzerland. And if anyone doubts that, you don't understand how things work in the Middle East.
Exactly. No, 100%. We've seen it again and again, that these sort of like symbols and the respect are super important to countries in this region. And this is something that the West, the US, Israel, Europe are keeping and missing, these small, which are not small for us, like huge stuff that actually show the intent. So Mati, what's happening now? Did the US agree to actually unfreeze some of the Iranian assets like now without Iran giving anything in return? Is the Strait of Hormuz open now or not? Are the ships moving? Like, it's super confusing. You have nobody to believe to, because the United States is not issuing any statements, and all this information that we have are from fake news from the Iranians. So it's kind of hard to know really what's going on. Maybe you can just give a little bit of an explanation about what's going on. Frozen assets released or not, Strait of Hormuz opened or not, and what's happening in South Lebanon.
Yeah, I love that you asked that question, because the Iranians have been the masters of misinformation. That is their playbook. They spread misinformation. Let's start with the money question. We'll start with that. Iran says through their official news agencies, several of them, they say the following: the US committed to giving us $300 billion worth of money in, call it what you want to call it, reparations, compensation for the damages caused to Iran during the war. And the US says immediately, President Trump immediately tweets in response and says, fake news that never happened. Then several officials within the Gulf states come out and say, we don't know what you're talking about. No one has talked to us about this. We're absolutely not planning to compensate Iran who attacked us in this war. It should be the other way around. They make a point of doing this clearly and very, very publicly. And then you get to the next question. Iran keeps throwing these numbers. The US will release 24 billion. The US will release 100 billion. The US will release all the frozen assets first before the negotiation starts. And in the US, they're looking around and they're saying, where are you getting this information? Because we're not telling you this. And it's all negotiation tactics. Now let's get to the Strait of Hormuz. This is a classical Iranian moment of misinformation. 2 days ago, the IRGC says, you know what? Israel is violating the ceasefire in Lebanon, which is, of course, a lie. Hezbollah was the one violating the ceasefire, and Israel responded to that. They say Israel is violating it. We're closing the Strait of Hormuz. Well, guess what happened that very same day? The very same day that Iran, the IRGC says, we close the Strait of Hormuz, not one, not two, but 55 ships travel through the Strait of Hormuz under the nose of Iran. And I would say, not being a naval expert in any way, shape, or form.
Doesn't sound like closed.
Yes.
Doesn't sound like something that is shut down.
Yeah, the 55 ships doesn't exactly sound like the straits were shut down. What's the problem? The global audience, and thankfully this does not apply to the viewers of TBN Israel. You guys are the best, and we know you do a much better job than most people of really following what happens in the news. Most people only skim through the headlines. And the headline says, IRGC threats, or Iran threatens to close Strait of Hormuz. And they look at that and say, I guess the Strait of Hormuz is closed. But it isn't. And Iran doesn't have the ability to close the Strait of Hormuz. Even while they were saying previously that the Strait of Hormuz was closed, even then, the US, and this is, I love how Trump is so transparent about these kind of things. He just blurts out in a briefing, and he says, by the way, the Iranians are saying it's closed. We sent through the Strait of Hormuz, I think it was 100 billion barrels of oil in the last week or something like that, while they're saying it was closed, or maybe it was a couple of weeks. But point being, the reality is much more complex, and most of the global news doesn't have time to dive into the details. They allow the headline to dictate what really happens. Now I want to say this. There is cause for concern because Iran has shown several things that are hugely alarming. One, the people who are negotiating with the US team don't have the authority to negotiate. We need to say that openly. They've said, look, we resolved this issue. We know who we're talking to. VP Vance has made a point. He was on a media blitz in the last 4 or 5 days, interviewing for essentially every big geopolitical podcast and channel in the world almost in the English language, claiming how good the agreement is and how strong the US is and how the whole process leading up to this moment was very, very clear and thought out, et cetera, et cetera. What's happening right now in the negotiation is not that. It shows lack of preparation. It shows that the Iranians are able to spin the conversation that's happening and the negotiation that's happening to the disadvantage of the U.S. negotiation team. Last time around, it was the same people. It was Kushner, Witkoff, Vance in the negotiations that took place in Islamabad, in Pakistan. This is the first round of negotiations several months ago, when Iran played these games of actually, the people you're talking to, they're not really able to negotiate. It's us back at home that are holding the power. The U.S. got up and left, and they should do that again. They should just say, okay, if this is what you're able to bring to the table, you are weak. You are not qualified to negotiate. You don't have the power to address this. We're out. And we're back to military action. We're back to sanctions, full blast. And how about we talk to you in a couple of weeks after you've lost 10, 20 more $billion. Maybe we start using your frozen assets to compensate the Gulf states for the damages you caused. And I want to say this openly. People love saying the U.S. has nothing to do in this negotiation. President Trump has his hands tied. There's nothing more the U.S. can do to fight against the Iranians. That is nonsense. That is so far from reality that it's just a joke. On a financial, I'll just give you two examples. On a financial level, if the U.S. wanted to break the spirit of the IRGC and the Ayatollah regime right now, they hold between the U.S. and their allies, the Emiratis and the Qataris, they hold somewhere between, let's say, 100 to 300 billion dollars cash of Iranian assets. I'm not talking just about crypto wallets and those kind of things, but easily over billion dollars, cash. They've already threatened. They said, this is the U.S. Treasury. If we wanted to, that number could not be 100 tomorrow. Maybe tomorrow the number's 80. And we take $20 billion cash and we give 5 to the Emirates, we give 5 to Qatar, we give 5 to Saudi, and we give 22 to Oman, who you targeted their oil assets, because that's reparations for the damages you caused. You don't like that? What if the next day the number goes from 80 to 65? Do you like it now? And think about it. Who's going to say to the U.S., you can't do this? They can do that. They have the ability to do that. They have the political power to do something like that. And the list goes on. There's many more such financial steps that they can take. The Emirates early in the war said, just so everyone's aware of this, we know of all your hidden assets, all the companies, the shell companies you use to hide your real assets, all the oligarchs that exist within Iran. We know where your accounts are. We know where your assets are. We know where your companies are. How about we start nationalizing those companies and we use them to pay ourselves back for the damages you caused us in the attacks? And what if we also require not only compensation, but also damages for the suffering and the stress that it caused? How does $20 billion sound for a start? So there's a lot that they can do. And then when you go to the military action, that really goes into the realm of what President Trump is willing to do, not what he's able to do, because he's able to do a lot. It's a question of politically how much he's willing to sacrifice to really make a statement against Iran. So I don't know. I don't like it where we are, Yael. I've spent the last 2 days just like, holding my head and saying, what on earth is happening here? This is a train wreck of a negotiation on every possible level. Someone needs to pull the plug on this on the U.S. side now and leave before this continues, because the Iranians they're publicly and intentionally humiliating the American negotiations team. That's what happens. The only one who responded publicly to that was President Trump, who immediately said, I know what's happening here, and made a point of showing Iran that he understands what they're doing and is responding with the same language. You think you're going to humiliate me? How about I humiliate you? You think you're going to say that you're going to do this to me? How about I do the same to you? And I love that about him, because he understands the language of the Middle East much better than many others who claim to understand diplomacy. President Trump understands it. He understands it completely. And you need to really give him the credit for that.
Yeah, Mati. And before this war officially started, Iran was filled with protesters, demonstrations, to the point of a civil war almost. And then what's it called? IRGC affiliates, which are the besieged forces, opened live fire towards the protesters. We have numbers of tens of thousands that were killed by the regime. And we are now receiving reports, of course not confirmed yet, that the Iranians are now using this time that the world is focused on diplomacy, that the world is talking about the Straits of Hormuz, about Lebanon, to actually crack down against any kind of opposition internally inside Iran. So what they're doing is they're accusing the opposition leaders of being spies for the United States and for Israel, then either arresting them or executing them. That's how they're cracking down against any kind of future resistance to the Iranian regime. What do you think will happen, or what do you think is happening now inside Iran, in the streets, and to the protesters?
It's a painful story. We've spent, both you and I, quite a lot of time talking to Iranian experts and Iranian expats, those who fled Iran in past years, in recent weeks and months. The story there is very, very sad. President Trump called on the Iranian people, this is before the war started, in the end of January of this year, and he said to them, people of Iran, go and fight against your regime. Help is on the way. Well, the help took them about a month and a half to show up, to give them help. And in that process, the Iranian regime, in a single day, we're talking somewhere between 24 to 36 hours, they killed, we don't know the number. Let's say the number is 10 to 30,000 in a day or two. That's what was killed. A very substantial number of people. It depends who you're asking. The main issue here is that they went from using bird shot through shotguns to using direct fire into crowds, taking headshots. And excuse the graphic description here, but you need to understand what this government does to its people. They went to shooting their people in the head as they demonstrate in the streets. And when you're a demonstrator and you know that the government is barricaded and opening fire in an arbitrary fashion, aiming to kill, not to maim, not to wound, but they're out, to kill, and then they'll punish your family for trying to collect your body from the hospital. I don't know how graphic I can get here without this video getting banned from YouTube. That's the government. And I want to say this differently. The U.S. is negotiating with a government who is willing to do the following to promote their agenda. They're willing to kill hundreds of thousands of their people. They've said this. They are willing to destroy the economy of their own nation. They are willing to fully destroy the future economy of the region. So destroy oil and gas infrastructure, to destroy the ports, to destroy the airfields, to destroy the trade centers, to destroy the perception of stability in the region, to the point where the entire Gulf area, including Iran, would see a recession for years after this. Iran is willing to do that. And by Iran, I mean the IRGC and whatever is left of the clerical government, the Ayatollah regime that are working hand in hand. They're willing to do that. And when you're facing that kind of adversary that's willing to sink ships, to massacre its own population, to destroy its own economy, both short-term and long-term, and to do the same thing to everyone else that's in the region, that's a huge problem. And by huge, I mean enormous problem, because you're dealing with an unrational player in international relations, someone who's willing to watch the world burn rather than negotiate. And the story right now within Iran is one of danger, one where the public knows that if they stand up against the regime, they stand to lose their lives. And not only that, their family stands to be tortured and imprisoned. And I say this, Yael, I'm all for democracy. I'm all for negotiating, for demonstrating for what's important to you. I don't know that I would go out and demonstrate if I knew that not only I would lose my life, but my family stands to spend the rest of their life, my extended family, without a job, in prison, being tortured. I don't know how many people in the West who, talk about fighting against the evil regime are willing to take that kind of price. It's terrifying. That's the regime that controls Iran. And people say, we imagine in Western thought this tipping point where, when people are chanting in the streets, the regime sort of, says, you know what, I get it, we were wrong. Let's, pack up our bags and go home, and we'll leave the place to the next government that comes. That's not what's going to happen in Iran. They're a substantial government. They have power beyond what people believe. They're willing to use, and I need to explain this, they use the members of the Basij, the enforcers, that are not from the big cities. They bring them in from the countryside. They bring them in from the Sunni militias and the Shia militias within Iraq to fight inside Iran against the population of Iran. That's who they bring in, people that don't even speak the same language, to enforce, to shoot, to sow fear into their population. And there's another factor here. The US had called on the Kurdish rebels to fight against the Iranian regime, and the Kurds didn't. They did it because they've been disappointed by the US and others repeatedly in the last 20 plus years. Not once, not twice. I've spent time with them in northern Iraq several years back. And these people are fierce warriors. They've stood up for themselves and for others, repeatedly taking dramatic casualties in the past. And they looked at this and they said, you know what? We need to wait for more clarity before we take military action against the Iranian regime. These people, they're willing to go to extreme lengths to stop any kind of rebellion against them. Why do we need this? We don't know where this is going. And the same goes to anyone else in the Iranian regime that says, you know what, things are too unstable right now, too unclear for us to stand up publicly against the current IRGC leadership or against the clerical leadership. That's where things are. And for that to happen, there needs to be more clarity. And I'm very sad to say that the negotiation that we're witnessing right now isn't that. It doesn't show that things are going against the Iranian regime. It shows that things are going in favor of the Iranian regime. And that's a sad reality, a painful reality, but that is the reality we're facing right now.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Mati. And we'll see you again this evening with our second report of the day here on TBN Israel. And if you haven't subscribed yet, this is your time to hit the subscribe button on TBN Israel. Also, you can look for Mati Shoshani on all the social media accounts and see life in Israel through our eyes. Thank you very much, Mati. We'll see you again later on tonight. Okay. Thanks for joining us again. We are TBN Israel. We report multiple times a day from Israel about what's happening in this land so that you will know how to pray for the situation. And while the delegations were leaving the negotiation rooms in Switzerland, in southern Lebanon, the IDF was still holding key positions against the Hezbollah terrorist organization. This is not real quiet. This is a ceasefire that is being tested every single hour, tested with rockets, with drones, with tunnels, and with terrorists trying to survive the underground attacks. And the question now is not only whether the United States and Iran will reach an agreement. The question is who will pay the price on the ground so that this agreement does not explode. Because after 18 hours of talks at the resort in Switzerland, the picture is becoming clearer. Qatar and Pakistan, the two mediators, announced a positive atmosphere, encouraging progress and a roadmap towards a final agreement within 60 days. But inside those diplomatic words, there's one clause that worries Israel very, very much. The creation of a deconflictation cell in Lebanon. So this cell is supposed to include the United States, Iran, and Lebanon under the guidance of Qatar and Pakistan. Its declared goal is to make sure that the military operation in Lebanon stops. Notice who's not mentioned there? Yeah, Israel is not mentioned there. Hezbollah is not mentioned there. And that's exactly the problem. The war on the ground is being fought between the IDF and the Hezbollah terrorist organization. Israeli forces are the ones that are holding the security zone. Hezbollah is the one firing, digging in, sending drones, and trying to rebuild its power. But the mechanism being created to prevent friction is being built over Israel's head, with Iran inside the room. From Tehran's point of view, this is an achievement. Not because the Iranians won a military battle, but because they managed to take Lebanon, insert it into the negotiations with the United States, and turn Hezbollah from a military security problem into an Iranian diplomatic card. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi has already presented this as a victory. He spoke about significant progress towards ending the Lebanese war, exemptions for oil and petrochemical exports, and the lifting of the blockade, including the release of the frozen assets and a major reconstruction plan for Iran. And then he marked the first test, the Lebanese cell. In other words, from Iran's point of view, the first experiment of the understandings is not the nuclear issue, not inspections, not the dismantling of uranium, not the missile program. Lebanon. And that tells the whole story. At the same time, the Strait of Hormuz also received its own mechanism. The sides agreed on a communication channel to prevent incidents and misunderstandings in order to keep safe passage for commercial ships. It sounds technical, it sounds calm, but it comes after Iranian threats to close the strait and after a sharp American threat to take control of it if necessary. Trump, as usual, spoke in a language that leaves very little room for interpretation. He threatened that if Iran closes Hormuz, the United States could take control of the strait. He also warned Tehran that if it does not stop Hezbollah in Lebanon, the United States will strike Iran again and harder. The Iranians immediately did what they know how to do well. They got up, they threatened, they said that the talks were in danger, they sent a message through the mediators, and then they returned to the process all over again. This is not a random chaos. This is their method. Tehran is testing Washington's limits. It wants to see how much Trump is willing to threaten, how much Vance is willing to absorb, and how much Qatar and Pakistan are willing to run between the rooms to save this agreement. In the United States, they're careful not to say that the talks collapsed. In Israel, the assessment is also that the Iranians do not really want to blow up the process right now. The reason is simple. They have too much to lose. Once the path opens to sanctions relief, oil exports, the release of frozen funds, and a discussion on the reconstruction fund that Iran is not rushing to flip the table over. It wants the money, it wants the time, it wants the recognition, and it wants to dictate the terms in Lebanon. That's where the Israeli dilemma now stands. Israel does not intend to withdraw from southern Lebanon just because of the American or the Iranian pressure. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said this publicly. He asked what the United States would do if, across its own border, it were threatened every day with rocket fire, kidnappings, and murder. According to Prime Minister Netanyahu, the United States would kill the terrorists and remove the threat. And he said, that is what we are doing. That's what we're doing in Lebanon against Hezbollah. Netanyahu also made clear that Israel will continue to hold a security zone as long as it is essential for protecting the citizens of Israel. Defense Minister Israel Katz sharpened the point even further, stating that Israel has no intention of withdrawing from the Beaufort Ridge. From his perspective, the Beaufort is part of the security zone, and it is essential for defending the communities of the Galilee and the IDF forces. This is not only a symbolic statement. The Beaufort and the Ali Tahrir Ridge are control points. They allow the IDF to see, to threaten, to respond, and to stay ahead of Hezbollah. Whoever holds those ridges does not need to guess what's happening below. He can act before the threat turns into fire on Metula, Kiryat Shmona, or the communities of the Galilee. IDF Chief of Staff Eyal Zamir arrived in southern Lebanon and delivered a clear message to the commanders there. Hezbollah is in severe distress. In just the past 2 days, a significant mid-level command chain from the Badr units and other units was eliminated. One of the Northern Command's central of gravity right now is in the Ali Tahrir and the Beaufort areas. According to the Chief of Staff, this is an underground fortress that Hezbollah built over 20 years. 20 years. Think about that for just a moment. While the world was talking about stability, while governments were exchanging messages, while the international mechanisms were talking about UN resolutions, Hezbollah was digging, pouring concrete, bringing in weapons, building command rooms, and preparing an entire combat space under the villages and the ridges of southern Lebanon. Now, when the IDF is finally reaching these points, the world tells it to stop. Not because the threat has disappeared, but because the negotiations in Switzerland need quiet. And you can see the images right next to me of a Hezbollah tunnel in South Lebanon. This is why the IDF is there. Does this look like a peaceful operation to dig tunnels, fill them up with rockets, with weapons? Let me know in the comments. What do you think? Would you let the terrorist organization build this sort of infrastructure on your border, within shooting distance from your civilians, from your communities, from your houses? Seriously. Wouldn't you want your government to go in and defend against this sort of a terrorist organization that openly states that it wants to destroy you? Let me know what you think in the comments. And just before we continue, it's important to share that we are TBN Israel, and we are reporting twice a day about what's happening in Israel, so that you'll know how to pray for the situation. This program is called Boots on the Ground. I'm Yair Pinto, with me is Mati Shoshani, and we need you to help us spread the truth. You can do that by liking this video. It really helps us. Sure, give a like, and also hit the subscribe button and share this video with somebody who wants to know what's happening in Israel every single day. Okay, so behind the scenes, Israel is also preparing for a more complicated scenario. Not a full withdrawal, but perhaps specific movements in South Lebanon. Not giving up the security zone, but perhaps pilot areas where the Lebanese army will be required to prove that it can clear areas of Hezbollah terrorists. This is an important point. So Israel does not trust that the Lebanese army will dismantle Hezbollah on its own. But if the Americans want a mechanism, Jerusalem wants a practical test, including maps, pilot zones, American supervision, and a result on the ground. No more statements, no more commitments to the Lebanese sovereignty, while Hezbollah is the one who's deciding who to fire and when. And at the same time, there's also an American attempt to bring Syria into the picture. Trump criticized the fact that Israel has been fighting Hezbollah for a long time and said that Syria might be able to play a bigger role. But Syria's president, Ahmed el-Sharaa, formerly known as al-Julani, quickly lowered the expectations. He said clearly, you will not see Syria fighting Hezbollah in Lebanon. According to him, Syria may be able to help disarm Hezbollah, but not through war and not through Syrian guardianship over Lebanon. That also teaches us something. Everyone wants Hezbollah to be weakened. But when the moment of payment arrives, everyone looks for someone else to go into this mud. The Americans want a mechanism. The Syrians want conditions. The Lebanese want sovereignty without a civil war. The Iranians, they want to save their proxy. And Israel, us, we are left facing the threat on the border. And at this time, inside Iran, the regime is showing the world its real face. Abroad, it speaks about diplomacy, economic reconstruction, sanctions relief, and a new future. At home, it is carrying out a violent wave of repression against citizens, young people, political activists, and ethnic minorities. The regime uses charges such as espionage, cooperation with Israel, and hostility towards God in order to break the resistance. People are arrested, interrogated, tortured, and according to the human rights organizations, many of them do not receive a real legal process or an independent layer. One of the difficult stories is that of Nasser Bekrazadeh, a 26-year-old young man who dreamed of returning to run his mobile phone shop. He was executed on charges of spying for Israel. He denied the charge. His lawyer argued that there was no real evidentiary basis. Alongside him, Merhab Abdullah Khazeh was also executed, a barber from a nearby village who was arrested after the women's rights protests. In a recording attributed to him, he described violence, torture, and threats and said that the confessions that were taken from him were false. This is happening while the world debates whether to release even more money to Iran. This is happening while Iran asks of recognition, legitimacy, sanctions relief, and negotiations at the highest level. And it needs to be said clearly, the regime that asks the world to trust it abroad does not trust its own citizens at home. It does not persuade them. It frightens them. And one more front remains in the shadows. The mysterious death of Dr. Ali Ashanian, an Iranian researcher in the field of artificial intelligence, in the city of Nice, France. Tehran's accusing the Israeli Mossad. They present him as an Iranian AI pioneer, someone who previously worked with Iran's defensive ministry, and a researcher in the fields that can be civilian but also military. But at this stage, there's no independent confirmation of this Iranian claim. There's no official French announcement about the murder investigation. There are no suspects. There are no indictments. There's no public evidence tying Israel to this death. So why is the regime publishing this? Because this too is part of the war. If a scientist dies under nuclear circumstances, Israel is blamed. If citizens protest, spies are blamed. If Hezbollah fires, Israel is blamed again. If Hormuz is in danger, Washington is blamed. Every time the regime comes under pressure, it looks for an external enemy to explain why it must continue ruling by force. This is the picture coming together this morning. In Switzerland, they speak about progress. In Tehran, they celebrate relief. In Lebanon, they're trying to build a mechanism without Israel. In southern Lebanon, the IDF is holding ridges and underground fortresses, and in Iran's interrogation rooms, the regime is eliminating dissent. And in the Strait of Hormuz, everyone is trying to create a communication line so that another fire does not begin. The problem is that the fire is already burning. It is burning in Hezbollah's tunnels, It is burning in the streets of Iran. It is burning in the global markets, and it is burning inside the biggest question of all. Does this agreement really restrain Iran, or does it only give it more time, more money, and more leverage against Israel? If Iran succeeded in bringing Hezbollah to the table without Israel being in the room, this is not only a diplomatic problem, it is the first security test of the day after the agreement. And what will happen next time that Hezbollah fires? Israel responds, and then Iran again threatens to close Hormuz? Let me know what you think about this in the comments. In the meantime, keep spreading the truth, follow us, and most importantly, do not forget to hit the subscribe button on TBN Israel YouTube channel so that you never miss another update from the ground of what's happening here. Look us up on our social media accounts, Yair Pinto and Mati Shoshani. Make sure you follow on the official accounts and pray for the situation. When you pray, I would say start by praying for your leaders. They are in tough negotiations with the Iranians. Pray for wisdom. Pray for the people of Iran. The people of Iran need you now more than ever. Because it's not in the news, it's even more dangerous. Because the Iranian regime, the Ayatollah regime, is cracking down on any kind of opposition. Pray for the people of Iran. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. And we'll see you again later on tonight for our second report. So don't go anywhere. Keep praying for the peace of Jerusalem.